Hello and welcome to this series on smart contract security. In this episode, we will answer the question, why is the web not secure enough? Let's look at some data. This is a listing of some of the most prominent data breaches that have happened over the last several years. A data breach happens when a hacker manages to gain unauthorized access to a data source like a database and extract some sensitive information. This can be done by either physically accessing a computer containing this information and stealing the data, or it can be done by getting around network security in some other manner. You will find many of the prominent corporations' names listed here. Facebook being the most recent one, which announced that 50 million profiles data was available to hackers. And then Google also had a similar incident where its Google Plus user information was hacked. And then now they've announced they're going to shut it down. We see Uber, Equifax, LinkedIn, 164 million their login password stolen. JP Morgan Chase in 2014, 83 million customer account details compromised. Yahoo, the big one, in 2013 with 3 billion records. Putting these numbers in context, if you look at a country like United States, I think their population is something like 320 million, and it's almost like half of their the Americans' data has been compromised. And remember, this is very a lot of sensitive information, personal information we share with these companies, with these sites, and we expect these organizations to keep it secure. And when that doesn't happen, clearly it's a breach of trust. And you will also be surprised that these companies don't have any dearth of financial resources to throw to keep their networks, to keep their hardware and software secure. But in spite of that, you see these kinds of incidents happening. The second set of data you see here is from what is known as denial of service attacks. So denial of service is basically a cyber attack in which the perpetrator's main goal is to target a machine or a network and make it unavailable to the intended recipients or their customers. So because of which the users of the system cannot go make their legit transactions. So GitHub, and then there was a major DNS provider impacting Airbnb, Netflix, PayPal, etc. in 2016. GitHub was attacked twice. So like this, there have been many such incidents. The net business impact has been that these sites were unavailable. The users couldn't use the system during that duration, and of course, it also involves loss of business for these companies. So why is web security weak? Note I use the word web and not the internet. So just to make the distinction, the internet is really the underlying layer on which the web layer sits. So the internet, by internet I mean the base protocols. Internet is a way by which you make information available, you make information accessible. So there are many protocols that is part of the internet stack. The more prominent ones being the protocols like SMTP and IMAP and POP3. These are all used for accessing emails between computers. They can exchange their email information. Then we have the FTP protocols for transferring files, and you also have the HTTP protocol, which is the web layer. Right. Now, at the fundamental layer of network protocols, internet is basically a very decentralized service. It's just a way by which multiple computers cooperate. They use these protocols to communicate with each other. When I say they are decentralized, it means that nobody owns these protocols, right? So in a way, you cannot shut down the internet. But the web is a different story altogether. So even though the web layer comprising of primarily HTTP was built over these base internet protocols, in reality what has happened is that over a period of time, the usage of the internet, of the web, changed from just accessing information to internet becoming what's known as Web 2.0. And this started sometime in the early 2000s when we started the internet of shopping with e-commerce, large e-commerce sites coming up. Then we have all these sharing economy sites, the big social media sites, the entertainment sites. So, if you look at most of the digital lives of consumers worldwide are in a way dependent on these handful of corporations whose services people use regularly. And because of which these corporations have built up huge stores of databases, and hence the information is highly centralized. All the data and all the transactions we do on all these sites is centralized. So it is really an unintended phenomenon that the core internet, which is basically a decentralized protocol, has over the period of time become highly centralized. Because most of the traffic, most of the commerce, the social media, the communication, collaboration, and content creation, hinges on just a few set of sites, and which means your all the data and transaction information is stored on central servers that are controlled by each of these sites. So what does that mean? So the moment you have all data stored centrally, it is susceptible to hacks. It is a very attractive target for hackers, because once they get access to one of these databases, they can gain access to millions and millions of user accounts. It compromises the confidentiality of data. Likewise, even if they can't hack it, they can try to deny service to the users. This kind of discredits those businesses whose sites have been subjected to DOS attacks. And it affects the availability of services. There is also the risk that in the centralized databases you have administrators who have a lot of privileges on the databases. A rogue admin can pretty much go and do anything on the database. And this is particularly a problem, not so much for, let's say, social media sites or other things, but it's a bigger problem for the databases of banks, where or financial companies, where your financial records are stored. There is also the risk of your identity being stolen and used by somebody else to discredit you, or even they can use it to damage you financially. And most important is that it's not just that architecturally the data is centralized, it's also the control of the data that rests with a few corporations. So you require third parties, the big corporations that have to be trusted, the banks and the other enterprises. You entrust your data to these companies, and they control it, really. Censorship is another big issue, in the sense that the moment everything is centralized, it can be subject to censorship. Government authorities can decide which site is up, which site should be shut down, what information should be censored. So in a way, it affects basic human rights to express themselves, human rights to privacy, and it affects individual empowerment, right? So these are really the flip side of having data centralized, and which was really not the vision of internet when they started creating it in the early 1970s. And secondly, the web is not a native transaction processing environment. The web started to basically share information, but on top of that, we do a lot of transactions, financial or otherwise, on top of the internet. The internet does not have a native payment protocol. It does not even have a native authentication protocol, right? Things like OAuth came much later, maybe in 2006, 2007. And even those protocols have been hijacked by some of the large corporations, and they've made it extremely complex. So it's not really an open, decentralized protocol anymore. In summary, web security is weak across all three dimensions: confidentiality of data, the availability of data and services, and the integrity of data. And the main reason for this situation is the unintended centralization of the web, even though the underlying internet protocols, the TCP/IP, the SMTP, FTP, and others were designed to be decentralized. So with this, we conclude this week's episode. In the next week, we will answer the question, are blockchains inherently more secure than the web? Until then, stay tuned and talk to you next time.